Several months ago, the Wall Street Journal published an article titled, "Why Tough Teachers Get Good Results." The article describes a Ukrainian immigrant teacher who made dramatic demands on his students, often pausing the orchestra to ask, "Who is deaf in first violins?" Upon his death, hundreds of former students returned from around the country to this teacher's hometown in New Jersey to play in a reunion band for his funeral. The Wall Street Journal recorded that this man's students had a remarkably high percentage of people who went on to achieve success later in life. They credited much of this success to his uncompromising demands on them as teenagers. I want to suggest to you today that this teacher received great rewards from his students because he asked great things of them and accepted nothing less. How much we demand from our students flows directly from how we see our purpose as teachers. My administrator, Melissa Edwards, once told me that she is at Thales Academy, Wake Forest, to make extraordinary people. That idea has stuck with me. Today, I want to consider two different theories of education, each of which flow from a philosophical assumption about the goal of education. Then we'll conclude with looking at where Thales Academy fits in this discussion. The first of these two traditions I want to consider today is the liberal arts tradition. Going back to classical antiquity, this model begins with the assertion that truth exists, and study is how we approach truth. Knowledge is complex, objective, and worth knowing for its own sake. The emphasis in this model is on the teacher as master, and the student as an apprentice who is seeking to learn what the master has already mastered. The Arte's perspective on education is less concerned with practicalities, and more concerned with stressing that however students spend the rest of their lives, they should pursue truth, goodness, and beauty in their field, their families, their associations, and their leisure. Two scholars can help us understand this tradition. Both C.S. Lewis and James Smith can help us think about what exactly this tradition means. C.S. Lewis's essay, The Abolition of Man, is one of my favorite books. It's a set of 5 lectures that Lewis delivered and later published. I want to look at one concept from this essay, the Tao. And before we proceed, please assume the lotus position and hum with me. No, I'm just kidding. Lewis uses the term Tao, which he borrows from the Chinese religion Taoism, to explain a fundamental part of human nature. Let me read to you Lewis's explanation of the Tao, and let's see if we can follow him through this philosophical maze. St. Augustine defines virtue as ordo amoris, the ordinate condition of the affections, in which every object is accorded that kind of degree of love which is appropriate to it. Aristotle says that the aim of education is to make the pupil like and dislike what he ought. When the age for reflective thought comes, the pupil who has been thus trained in ordinate affections or just sentiments will easily find the first principles in ethics. But to the corrupt man they will never be visible at all, and he can make no progress in that science. Plato before him had said the same. The little human animal will not at first have the right responses. It must be trained to feel pleasure, liking, disgust, and hatred at those things which really are pleasant, likable, disgusting, and hateful. In the Republic, the well-nurtured youth is one who would see most clearly whatever was amiss in ill-made works of man, or ill-grown works of nature, and with a just distaste would blame and hate the ugly even from his earliest years, and would give delighted praise to beauty, receiving it into his soul and being nourished by it, so that he becomes a man of gentle heart. All this before he is of an age to reason, so that when reason at length comes to him, then, bred as he has been, he will hold out his hands in welcome, and recognize her because of the affinity he bears to her. In early Hinduism, that conduct in men which can be called good consists in conformity to or participation in the Rita, that great ritual or pattern of nature and supernature, which is revealed alike in the cosmic order, the moral virtues and the ceremonial of the temple. Righteousness, correctness, order, the Rita, is constantly identified with Satya, or truth, correspondence to reality. As Plato said that the good was beyond existence, and Wordsworth that through virtue the stars were strong, so the Indian masters say that the gods themselves are born of the Rita and obey it. The Chinese also speak of a great thing, the greatest thing, called the Tao. It is the reality beyond all predicates, the abyss that was before the Creator himself. It is nature. It is the way, the road. It is the way in which the universe goes on, the way in which things everlastingly emerge, stilly and tranquilly, into space and time. It is also the way which every man should tread in imitation of that cosmic and supercosmic progression, conforming all activities to that great exemplar. In ritual, says the Analects, it is harmony with nature that is prized. The ancient Jews likewise praised the law as being true. This conception in all its forms, Platonic, Aristotelian, Stoic, Christian, and Oriental alike, I shall henceforth refer to for brevity simply as the Tao. Some of the accounts of it which I have quoted will seem perhaps to many of you merely quaint or even magical, but what is common to them all is something we cannot neglect. It is the doctrine of objective value, the belief that certain attitudes are really true and others really false to the kind of thing the universe is and the kind of things we are. In this passage, Lewis is talking about the Tao. By this phrase, he means all the inherited tradition of those generations which have gone before the present. Lewis believes that there is an ideal form of truth, beauty, and goodness which all societies in all times have aspired to reach. To be educated, for Lewis, is to live in accordance with this tradition. This tradition is not just Western. It's Eastern, it's Western, it's ancient, and it's modern. It is all the efforts of mankind from the beginning to the present day to live in light of the idea that there is a goodness of life that should be pursued. So one important point to note is that students do not already know this. The process of education becomes the handing down of a sacred trust inherited from the last generation. A teacher, then, is one who has received this trust and is passing it on. This Tao is both general and specific. It's general in the sense that it is a lifetime pursuit of these ideals, and specific in that there is a body of knowledge that students master as their method of approaching the ideals. Now, James Smith offers a more recent philosophy of education in this tradition. But before addressing Smith, we need to think for just a moment about René Descartes. Now, Descartes is known, when he is known, for the phrase cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. In philosophy, Descartes is the beginning of modern philosophical thought. He roots human nature in the intellect, a marked distinction from medieval philosophy. I bring up Descartes because we are affected by his work. We assume the most important part of a person is his cognitive ability. And that assumption begins with Descartes, and it is a hallmark of the modern era, as opposed to the medieval era. Smith argues instead that Western civilization made a fundamental mistake in siding with Descartes. He believes the most important part of human nature rests in the heart. The ancient Hebrews used the heart as a metaphor for the totality of human nature, and Smith follows them in that metaphor. Now, what you see on the screen is Smith's argument about human nature put into a single diagram. He argues that humans are fundamentally creatures designed to love, and that we love automatically. Now, the centerpiece of Smith's diagram is the heart. He believes that this heart represents everything it is to be human, and you'll see coming out of the heart is an arrow. This arrow represents love or desire. Smith believes that humans as desiring creatures are always expressing love, and that love has an object. It's always aimed at a particular target. We don't love in the abstract, we love towards a target. So our love is always going outwards from us, towards something in particular. And that love can go towards a good end, or it can go towards a poor end. And the problem is that often as human beings, we do love the right things, but we also love the wrong things. I think this is easiest to see in our students, that as teachers we long for them to love good literature, when in fact they would rather read easy books that are actually bad for them. Or we long for them to love good music when they would rather listen to the latest Miley Cyrus hit. We naturally lean towards loving the wrong things. So the question becomes, how do we love the right things? Well, rather than bemoaning our loves, Smith argues that the goal of education is to rightly form loves. The teacher is the one who shapes the loves, the desires of the student. Much like Lewis's uninitiated student, Smith argues that the student is one who has ill-formed desires. To correct those desires, Look back with me at the beginning of the diagram, where we see that the heart is shaped by the half circle to the left. Smith calls these liturgies, and by liturgy, Smith means the specific habitual practice that has great significance. He believes that when we do things that are significant, we do them over and over, those practices actually shape the habits of the heart. And so that when we repeat things again and again, significant things, that actually shapes habits within us that aim our loves in particular directions. So Smith places a great emphasis on repeated action as the way of shaping the desires of the heart. Let me illustrate this through a quick personal story. About a couple years ago, my wife and I hit a period in our lives where we had several part-time jobs, and our paycheck stretched to a certain part of the month, but our bills kept going for about 10 more days before we got another paycheck. We sat down and figured, well, we'll just have to put anything that comes up during those 10 days, we'll have to put on the credit card. I was raised to hate the idea of a credit card, and my father always taught me that it's very easy to be enslaved to debt, and I should avoid that. But in this case, we figured we've got to do this for a certain amount of time, and then our habits will change when we get a new job. And that's pretty much how it went. Next month came around, paychecks were done, but I still needed gas. So I pulled out the credit card, and there's this gut-wrenching hatred in my soul for having to use the credit card. But I used it, and I went on. I was going to pay it off in a couple weeks, no big deal. Well, this happened for 2 or 3 months, and I realized about 3 months later, I no longer had that same gut-wrenching feel in my pit of my stomach. And 6 months in, my wife and I had a revelation. We were going over our monthly receipts and realized I thought I had only spent $200 on the credit card when in reality it had been much closer to $600. The hatred in my heart for the credit card had given way to the easiness of just pulling out the card and swiping it and moving on and not worrying about it. Habitually using the credit card had actually changed my habits and my feelings, my desires about the credit card. So if we put Smith and Lewis together, we arrive at a picture of education as the shaping of our students' desires so that they love their intellectual inheritance. So in terms of this first perspective on education, following in the liberal arts tradition, we see an emphasis on education as a means of shaping the human being into one capable of living in light of the Tao, and who consequently loves the right things. The second view I want us to consider today might be called the progressive view. John Dewey best articulates this view, following in the tradition begun by Descartes, which placed the emphasis of human nature entirely in the cognitive sphere. Dewey adopted a pragmatist understanding of education, and he crafted an educational machine which dealt in facts. Students should learn facts pertinent to their lives. The problem lies in Dewey's divorce of facts from truth. The goal of education is not to pursue truth with a capital T, but to acquire facts and skills. This results in a student thoroughly trained in a subjective approach to knowledge. In this system, knowledge does not exist for its own sake, but only for its utility. Dewey placed the emphasis in the learning process on the student, and particularly the student as self-learner. Empowerment of the student became more important than the student mastering a body of knowledge. Separated from truth, facts lack an interpretive framework. The system results in students who do not pursue the higher things in life, but have been thoroughly trained only to work for that which is useful. So today, we've considered these two views, the liberal arts view and the progressive view. The liberal arts view calls teachers to see themselves as carriers of the torch, passing on this tradition to the next generation. Students are naturally ill-formed and do not love the right things. Teachers form them through continual exposure to truth, beauty, and goodness. And then we have the progressive view, which sees the teacher as a facilitator, who helps the student master necessary facts, but really guides the student along the journey of self-discovery. The progressive view does not elevate the teacher and ironically results in an inferior end. So where do we fit in this spectrum? Thales Academy is a classical school following an adaptation of Dorothy Sayers' outline in The Lost Tools of Learning. Sayers argued that child development and the medieval education system actually line up perfectly. Students move through the grammar stage, where all that is required is rote memorization of vast quantities of data, to the logic stage, where children begin questioning everything and they must be taught how to rightly question, before finally arriving at the maturity of the rhetoric stage, where years of memorized data, filtered through a correct reasoning grid, results in a student capable of clear articulation and reasoned discourse that might take original form. So this is the approach of Thales Academy. Direct instruction, trivium, and our developing high school courses emphasizing ethics and rhetoric are all heading in this direction. In the grammar stage, we require the memorization of great truths. In the logic arena, we guide students to think correctly, getting to certain ends. And in the rhetoric stage, we welcome them as well-trained adults, capable of entering into the great conversations that make up our common intellectual heritage. The Wall Street Journal caught a glimpse of the rewards that a great teacher receives. Years of faithful effort bearing fruit in lives able to take advantage of their freedom. The demands we make of our students will flow directly from where we're trying to get them. Let's make extraordinary people.